Compared to nationals who work their entire lives in one country, migrant workers and refugees can face specific obstacles in accessing social protection. These include limited information on their rights, legal restrictions, lack of coordination across countries, and complex procedures that hinder access. The ILO, in collaboration with the International Social Security Association, has developed practical guidance on a variety of administrative and policy options to extend social protection to migrant workers, refugees, and their families.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the launch of the ILO ISSA Guide on extending social protection to migrant workers, refugees, and their families. I am Manuela Tomei, the Director of the Conditions of Work and Equality Department of the ILO, and will moderate the first half of today's webinar. The guide that we are launching today comes at a very opportune time. The current pandemic has shed further light on the importance of the effective protection of the rights of migrant workers, refugees, and their families. Many have lost their jobs or livelihoods, experienced reduction or non-payment of wages, and put up with worsening living and working conditions. Women migrant workers have been disproportionately hit. For instance, many migrant domestic workers were left stranded without a home, income, or access to social protection. Already before the pandemic, migrant workers, particularly those with temporary or informal jobs, face higher barriers in obtaining social protection benefits, including healthcare. Despite their contributions and essential services that many of them have provided, including during the crisis, migrant workers, refugees, and their families do not enjoy equal treatment with respect to social protection. Moreover, they also risk losing their social security benefits when they move across countries due to the absence of social security agreements that ensure the portability of these benefits. This issue warrants serious attention if recovery from the pandemic is to be human-centered, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable. And this matter acquires even further relevance in the light also of the ongoing conflict in Europe, which has already generated over 2 million displaced people. We hope that today's presentation and discussion of the new ILO ISSA Guide on social protection for migrant workers, refugees, and their families will offer further insights on how to close this social protection gap. We have a panel with very distinguished speakers who will share their views on the policy options put forward in the guide, drawing upon their organizations and country experiences and practices. We will first listen to Shara Razavi, the Director of the Social Protection Department of the ILO, and Marcelo Aviramia Caetano, the Secretary General of the International Social Security Association, one of ILO's long-standing partners, who both will give the welcoming remarks. I will then invite Juliana Manrique Sierra, Labor Director of the National Association of Employers of Colombia, known as ANDI in short, and Ms. Evelyn Astor, Economic and Social Policy Advisor of the International Trade Union Confederation, or ITUC, to provide their own remarks. Thereafter, I will call upon Michelle Layton, the Chief of the Labor Migration Branch at the ILO, to give a short overview of the scope and content of the new guide. After Michelle's presentation, there will be a roundtable discussion with panelists from Argentina, Morocco, and Portugal. The roundtable will be moderated by Raul Ruggia Frick, Director of the Social Security Development Branch of ISSA. Translation is available in English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. You need to click on the globe that you see at the bottom of your screen and select the language of choice. You can submit your questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A button, which is located in the bar below our image. If you are in full screen mode, you will directly see the Q&A button. On the contrary, if you are in partial window mode, click on the 3 dots to open the QA window. Please do not use the raise hand button, and questions will be submitted to the panelists, time allowing. So without further ado, I would like to invite my colleagues, Shara and Marcelo, to delivering their welcoming words. Shara, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Manuela, and greetings to everyone. It is a real pleasure to be part of this ISSA ILO webinar on a topic that is both very timely and also highly significant. First off, I think it's important to place the discussion that we're having today against the stark reality that we have, which is that some more than 4 billion people, that is more than half of the globe's population, have absolutely no form of social protection to fall back on when they need it. For example, when they are sick, if they get injured at work, when they have children, or when they get old. The kind of squandered lives and enormous social costs that this implies are simply unacceptable. Now, the pandemic, as Manuela has already alluded to, has shown in a very stark and painful way the existing gaps in social protection, especially for vulnerable groups. And it has also shown how important and urgent it is to build social protection systems that are truly comprehensive and inclusive of everyone. Such systems guarantee access to healthcare, and they also ensure income security for people across the life cycle, as well as protecting jobs and giving the kind of protection that is needed, obviously, to workers. It is crucial to realize the right to social security for all, including for migrant workers, refugees, and their families, which is the focus that today's discussion is going to take. Now, in times of crisis, and unfortunately, we seem to be going from one crisis to another, international solidarity becomes more important than ever. Strong commitment from states to invest in social protection, and also, very importantly, to engage in meaningful cooperation are needed to be able to ensure access to social protection benefits across countries for migrant workers, refugees, and their families who are crossing international borders. At the 2021 International Labour Conference that was held in June, governments, workers, and employers' organizations unanimously adopted a resolution and a set of conclusions that set out in very clear terms a framework for action for the ILO and its constituents, and instructing them to work together to build universal social protection systems. And to achieve this, the conclusions also stated, again, in very clear terms, the importance of ensuring that migrant workers and their families have access to social protection systems, including through multilateral, bilateral, and multilateral agreements. Now, access to social protection for all, including for migrant workers, for refugees and their families, is also among the priorities of the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's very clearly marked in the 2018 Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, the Global Compact on Refugees, and the UN Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, as well as the recently launched Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions. The ILO, through its wide body of normative standards and technical assistance, is supporting governments, workers, and employers' organizations in their endeavor to extend social protection to migrant workers, to refugees and their families, including within the framework of the ILO global flagship program on building social protection floors for all, as well as part of its efforts to ensure an inclusive human-centered recovery. And it's in this context that the ILO, in very close collaboration with ISSA, has developed the practical guidance, which is based on international labor standards, good practices that exist around the world, and is providing capacity building as well as technical advisory services around the world. This guide, which is one of 6 guides that have been produced under the flagship program, is one that we're very proud to be addressing and launching today. And it calls for the design and implementation of nationally appropriate and inclusive social protection systems, but also very importantly, the portability of benefits across countries. And it underlines that the failure to address social protection gaps comes, as we know, at a very high political and economic cost for governments, as well as a huge social cost and human rights violation, and it hinders their development efforts, and most importantly, again, as I said, contradicts the human rights to social security and our universal values. Universal social protection, simply stated, it's not a choice, it is a necessity. So allow me to end here, Manuela, and hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shara, and you are right. Universal social protection is not an option. It's a must, it's a necessity. I would like now to turn to Marcelo Albiramia Caetano, who's the Secretary General of ISSA, for his welcoming remarks.
Ok, bem, vou aproveitar a oportunidade da tradução simultânea em português e vou falar na minha língua materna.
I will take advantage of the interpreting and speaking my own language, which is Portuguese. So first of all, good morning, good afternoon to all of you. This topic is very relevant, and when we talk about social security, we have to take into account that the number of migrants, refugees, asylum seekers are growing more and more worldwide. At the same time, we see that despite these growing numbers, the security, the social security is not available consistently and for all. In particular, social security is not available for these particular groups in several places in the world. For all of that, it is important to take into account these groups. Of course, with these initial words, I am giving emphasis to Social Security, even because I am the Secretary for Social Security. And the seminar today is important to express our political support to the cause. But it goes beyond. It is not just a political issue, a moral issue. This is an economic issue. In my opinion, if we have a good social security protection for these groups, migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers, we are going to extend the socio-economic development of the hosting countries, the countries that are receiving these people, and also from to the countries where these people come from. So I believe that we should look at this issue as an issue that generates economic gains to all parties. For us who work in social security, we work a lot with the implementation of these policies. And this is very important for us. The coverage of this population of these groups is very complex, and that And that means that we have to give the due attention for the implementation of these policies. Therefore, I would like just to reinforce the relevance and the importance of this issue. We need to invest correctly in this area, and we have to have the right skills and competences to apply this on the daily practice. Without thinking about all these factors, we run the risk of having policies, but when we try to implement such policies, the efficacy, the efficiency of these policies may not fulfill what we desire. So how ISA or ISA can collaborate with this process? We have 320 institutions that work with social security. They are our members in over 160 countries in every continent. And in our interaction with our members, we can see the commitment to improve the coverage, to improve the implementation of these social security policies. And this should be seen as a tool, a supporting tool to these efforts in the different countries, to increase the coverage and of these different groups, migrants, refugees, and their families. So I would like to say that we are not just making ourselves available to you, but we are also creating efforts to improve this work, to improve the efficiency of how this is implemented. And I can give as an example the fact that we created a database, an international database that had a report published in this area. So we have this database that is unique and has a worldwide coverage, and very soon it could be accessed via our website. This database, the reports, will help everyone to understand the different agreements that are being published worldwide. We also have a task force that was created to support the different institutions, giving a technological tool to exchange data in these different areas, covering these different groups that are the target of this seminar today. I believe that with these tools, we can help and improve the coverage of social security for these groups. We have to take into account that some of the countries do not have social security for migrants and refugees, but and with that, it means that we have to facilitate the creation of these new agreements and policies in this area. To conclude, I would like to express my own personal satisfaction, my happiness in being committed with the ILO long-term in this area. And as we've been discussing here in this webinar, this collaboration is in terms of social protection, social security. And in the last few years, we have been seeing that these agreements, this joint commitment led to several projects developed in the different departments of the ILO to provide solutions generated by the COVID-19 crisis. So this work that has been developed, it's a joint work, is an example, is a fundamental example of a collaboration that ILO and ISA is doing at the moment. So based on my own background as a general secretary, I am very confident that this guide that is being published now will be very relevant, and it will provide a fundamental support for policymakers, for the institutions that implement such policies, and that will generate an increase in the social protection for the refugees, migrant workers, asylum seekers, and their families. So I am concluding my speech by saying that I am so happy that we have managed to work in this area with the work that we have done in this area, and I believe that we are going to do more and more. So thank you very much for your attention.
Towards our continued cooperation also in relation to delivering in practical terms social protection for migrants and refugees and their families. So I would like now to turn to Juliana Manrique Sierra from ANDI and ask her a question. In the context of the pandemic, many countries have taken important steps towards the inclusion of migrant workers in national insurance systems. What are your and Andy's views on this development from a business perspective? Would further reforms to the social security system be an opportunity or a limitation for business? The floor is yours, Juliana.
Muchas gracias, Manuela, por darme el uso de la palabra.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I just wanted to say hi to everyone, to ILO, to ISA, and to congratulate you and to the researchers for what you did with this guide. I think this guide is going to be fundamental, it's going to be crucial for all the steps that we're going to take forward in this topic. And today, I also wanted to give the perspective of the employers on this topic that is crucial. And to answer the question of Manuela, for example, I would like to refer to Colombia's experience. So, for example, the last years, we have done a lot of efforts to actually extend this social protection, including healthcare, specifically healthcare. And we did, for example, we have efforts in trying to give permissions to stay to a lot of Venezuelan people that are in Colombia, for example, for them to be able to access healthcare. Through a type of status that is temporary protection, that what did was like speeding up the processes to identify the migrant people and to regulate their situation in our country. Also to give them access to healthcare and to do it a bit faster. Also in Colombia, for example, we ratified a covenant that in Latin America, that what we did it, and the aim was of this covenant was to help all these migrants to have access to healthcare and also to mitigate risks, and also, for example, to put an emphasis on this topic. So what means is that, for example, the Colombian people that live in those countries that ratify this covenant can also access to these services. So countries like Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, they also ratified it. So I think a lot of people ratified. And from the perspective of the employers, we definitely are committed to extend this social protection, also as we highlight in this guide that we're launching today. And I think this is really important and it's a first step, obviously, to, as we say, transpose and make sure that the social security protection is also accessible in both countries. And it's also really important to identify migrant workers and refugees. We need to identify the people, for example, that have a legalized status in that country, and for us it's crucial that they do have access to this social protection. And something that is also really complex when we're talking about, for example, migrants that have not a legal status in a country, or migrants that are, for example, working not in the economic market. So those migrants, for example, are not identified by the government, and they do not have access to healthcare and to social protection. And that's why we should put special attention through social dialogue, and also to implement, for example, social policies that extend the protection to these workers also. And in line with these public protection policies that we are observing in this guide, we think that is really, really important to have legislation and public policies in terms of migration and social protection that are clear, that are transparent, and that are efficient, and that allow us to have also like this circulation of workers, that the workers can move from one country to another, but still having access to this social protection and to these decent conditions. And the systems that are complex and are changing all the time, what are doing is just being an obstacle to national laws, and just are threatening the labor market, and are also an obstacle to give this protection to these migrants, and also are also an obstacle for migrants for them to have a job, sustain their families, and support their families. So for us, for the employers, in those first measures that we think they are really important, I think first step should be see how we can actually walk the talk, and how actually we can give this labor security and simplify these regulations and these frameworks that are really, really being, for example, now an obstacle, for example, in the Latin American reality, because there's a lot of bureaucracy and it's an obstacle. So for us, it's important to move forward with this concept of public policies as the guide that we launched today is saying and included, and seeking to improve also the material that we have, and to ensure the rights of the workers. And we need to be this needs to be a priority in all the political agendas of our countries. And to finish my intervention, I also would like to say that it would be important to recognize this migrant crisis as an opportunity. We need to change perspective. We really need to change the way we see this migrant crisis. It's not a problem. We should not see it as a problem, and we should really see it as an opportunity to actually receive this population and this society that can support our countries, that can also help us growth. And we need to see this way. We need to also implement systems to monitor and to evaluate and to identify this migrant population, to be able to give them a status, and also to extend these protection systems. Thank you very much.
Por estas ideas.
Thank you very much to you, Juliana, for all these ideas, for all these ideas and practice. And as you said, like these practical ideas, that, as you said, like we should not look at this crisis as a problem, but as an opportunity to actually make a change and to do it from an inclusive perspective. So thank you very much.
Ms. Astor from ITUC, I have a question for you as well. Could you please tell us about workers' organization advocacy work for the extension of social protection to migrant workers, refugees, and their families? And how do you try to address some of the practical obstacles facing migrant workers in terms of access to social protection? I have another question, which is if you could tell us a few words about the practical value of the ILO ISA guide for workers' organizations around the world. Thank you. Over.
Sure, and hello, Manuela, and hello to all of you. So let me start by underlining, first of all, that ensuring migrants' rights and addressing the barriers for migrants' access to social protection in particular, this is really a major priority for the labor movement. And As has been alluded to already, this is a very complex issue because we know that the underlying causes for migrants' difficulties in accessing social protection vary. They're ranging from the fact that migrants tend to be overrepresented in informal and precarious work, where they are more likely to be economically vulnerable and where access to social security is often more limited or sometimes even non-existent. The legal restrictions for foreigners to access destination country social security programs, the inability for migrants to build up sufficient social security contributions due to a lack of preservation and portability of their rights accrued across different countries, as well as the practical barriers that impede migrants' effective access, such as lack of language skills or even awareness of existing rights. And so in terms of the actions that unions are taking, I mean, we need quite a big toolbox of different measures to address the varying causes. I should say, first of all, that many unions have specific structures for representing migrants in order to take up their concerns within national level negotiations with governments to improve their working conditions, their access to social security. Unions are very often also involved in the conclusion of bilateral labor agreements. But also there are quite a number of unions as well as regional organizations for unions that have developed specific resources for migrants to assist them, provide them access to information as well as support services, as unions are often one of the first trusted actors that migrants go to when they're asking for information around their rights at work and their rights to social security. And to give you a couple of practical examples, CSC Belgium, for instance, they have a special portal for migrants where they can access information about their rights at work and rights to social security. The AFL-CIO in the US, they also have specific resources available to migrants there. And there are also quite a number of examples of bilateral and multilateral cooperation between trade unions, between migrants and receiving and sending countries. To support unions' outreach to migrants in the host country, to provide information and services to migrants. And a few examples are, bilateral agreements between the British and Portuguese trade unions, the German and Polish agricultural trade unions, who have also, by the way, published bilingual guides to agricultural workers, informing them of their rights in terms of working time, occupational health and safety, salaries, but also social security. The Indonesian and Malaysian trade unions have cooperation agreements and coordinate when it comes to policy demands, including around social security for migrants. And we see also the Arab Migrant Resource Center, which is a product of cooperation between trade unions in the Arab region and those in Southeast Asia, because many unions and many workers from Southeast Asia go to the Arab region to work. And this resource center helps provide workers access to information around their rights, their working conditions, conditions for getting healthcare, and other types of social security. But I think it's also important to point out there are some more general measures that unions are taking to support decent work and access to social protection, not specifically targeted to migrants, but very, very beneficial in terms of closing those gaps. For example, around campaigns and negotiations for minimum wages, calling for tackling non-standard forms of work, recognition for gig workers to have access to social security rights, for example, in the UK, where the unions have actually put forward some legal challenges around this, campaigns to allow informal workers to access social security. And this is really important because, as I mentioned, migrants are often concentrated in non-standard and informal forms of work. So also taking measures to improve the regularity of their employment and is of course very helpful in that regard. And finally, as you know, I mean, unions are very active in campaigning for the establishment of social protection floors in line with ILO recommendation 202, which provides social security guarantees to workers irrespective of their employment status, of their contribution history. Unions have been calling for these to be implemented in a non-discriminatory way, irrespective of migration status. For more information, you're welcome to consult a policy brief we recently published that provides information on trade union policies and activities on migrants' access to social protection. I'll put it in the chat. But let me just finish by congratulating the ILO and ISA on this new guide. I think it provides really a wealth of information on the reasons for migrants' disadvantage to social security and some measures that can be taken to address them, which are not only useful from a practitioner's perspective, but also for trade unions who are actively campaigning and negotiating for extending social security rights to migrants. So well done.
Thank you very much, Evelyn, and also thank you for indeed telling us about the variety and the range of services and actions that the labor movement takes in terms of bridging the social protection gap between nationals and migrants. I'm conscious of the fact that we are a bit behind schedule. Now I would like to give the floor to Michelle. Michelle Layton will provide a very brief presentation of the guide that we have been talking about until now. Michelle, you have about 7 to 10 minutes for your presentation. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Manuela. And it's really a pleasure now to present the scope and the contents of the guide after hearing so many comments from the colleagues. This is really meant to reach all policymakers and stakeholders. If we move to the next slide, the guide has real potential to benefit so many people. There are now 169 million migrant workers, and nearly 70% of all working age migrants are migrant workers. And there's 26 million refugees. As the Secretary General Catano mentioned, many of these are not protected. And the guidance responds to a growing demand by governments and practitioners for better tools and lessons on how to put the right systems in place for social protection. The guide analyzes all of the applicable legal frameworks and standards and the policy options that are available. And it gives examples and practices that are being implemented now in different countries and different regions. These practices, we hope, can inspire countries to adopt the needed legal and policy reforms when they design social protection schemes. And of course, while they're negotiating social security agreements. The beginning point for extending or expanding social protection for migrants and refugees is really to assess what are the protection gaps for migrants and refugee workers? What are the groups left out? Who is facing discriminatory treatment? We see often, for example, that high-skilled workers may have good support, particularly through their employment relationship, but low-skilled workers are often left out, including through exclusionary legislation. And whole sectors like domestic work can be excluded, which put at risk women, migrant workers who make up most of the world's domestic workers. The first chapter provides an understanding of the benefits of extending social protection to all migrant workers. And it examines the challenges they face, as well as the practices that are being deployed on how to overcome those challenges. We know that challenges can arise from both legal and practical barriers that exist in countries of origin, but also countries of employment and destination. So understanding these issues can help policymakers to adopt mechanisms targeting the barriers and to implement appropriate policy responses. The UN and ILO conventions and ILO recommendations provide what is a comprehensive international legal framework for protecting migrant workers' rights to social protection. And in the second chapter, that unpacks the standards and key principles of equality of treatment and non-discrimination on which they're based. The standards provide important guidance on extending social protection coverage to migrant workers and refugees, but also including ensuring the portability of social security rights and benefits across countries. And we heard about this from some of the speakers. The chapter also describes the regional instruments which are important and relevant to assist governments. And of particular importance, we encourage all countries to ratify these standards. The chapter provides details on the ratification process and the ILO supervisory mechanisms that monitor their implementation. Now, the third chapter really is about bilateral and multilateral social security agreements. And these are some of the most commonly used measures for ensuring that countries coordinate on the portability of social security entitlements. And today there are 660 of these instruments already in place. But unfortunately, they do not cover the vast majority of migrant workers, and especially those in low-skilled jobs and working in the informal economy where so many migrants are simply unprotected. It will be important for countries to consider broadening the scope of these agreements or to negotiate new ones that are more inclusive of migrants and refugees and their families. In this regard, the chapter outlines the key elements of these agreements and an 8-step process for their negotiation. They include examples of bilateral, regional, and multilateral agreements, and of the kinds of institutional, operational, and administrative considerations which are needed to support the implementation. Bilateral labor migration agreements, on the other hand, are somewhat different. They're broader and they regulate employment more generally for overseas workers. And where they incorporate human rights and labor standards, they can protect migrant workers. But many of these bilateral labor migration agreements do not include provisions on social protection, or they may do so in a very limited way. So the guide identifies important considerations for social protection that governments can include in these broader bilateral labor migration agreements. And complementary to this is new UN system-wide guidance on bilateral labor agreements, which ILO supported and that reinforce these provisions and this guide. Now, another way to address this issue is that we also consider if migrants don't have access to social protection in countries of origin or destination, they will have no entitlements to carry back home. And this creates human insecurity. So another way of dealing with this is to adopt unilateral measures providing social protection. Now, migrant workers could be covered by national social security laws, and then they can benefit from equal treatment. There are many different types of these unilateral measures that governments can adopt. And Chapter 5 provides an analysis of these measures with examples of approaches that different countries are using. We have paid special attention in this chapter to national social protection floors as a powerful tool to contributing to universal social protection. And the chapter also highlights the need for affirmative measures to address the practical obstacles that migrant workers face, even if social protection laws, even if they're covered by social protection law. These supplementary measures can include communication campaigns, simplifying administrative procedures, and ensuring migrant workers have representation where needed, along with many others. The next two chapters deal with social protection of certain groups and groups in vulnerable situations, including refugees. Because migrant workers make up many different ethnicities, cultures, education, and skills levels, and they work in different sectors of the economy, their access to social protection can differ. Their migration status, the type of employment contract they hold, the duration of stay, and other characteristics can influence their ability to access social protection. And the government responses should account for the needs of these different populations. And these two chapters provide insights into the specific obstacles these groups may face and the international legal framework and policy options that would be most relevant, especially to protect migrant workers in vulnerable situations. Migrant domestic workers, seasonal agricultural workers, and those in an irregular situation are some of the groups that face particular difficulties in accessing social protection, and they might be excluded by law or other barriers from even receiving social protection. This chapter emphasizes the importance of extending coverage to these groups, but also specifically refugees and asylum seekers who can face additional constraints to their protection, even if they're covered by law and may not receive protection from their home countries. The integration of refugees in national social protection systems, including contributory and non-contributory systems and schemes, should take these specific vulnerabilities into account, as well as the principle of equality of treatment. Strengthening social protection systems benefits not only refugees and host communities, but can be a means to provide sustainable and effective solutions for transitioning between humanitarian assistance to development and peace outcomes. And we know that this can foster longer-term social cohesion. The guide also pays attention to gender gaps in social protection. And this chapter looks specifically at the barriers that exist in society and the policy options that governments can use to tackle gender discrimination in access to social protection. It gives examples of gender responsive national policies, bilateral agreements, and it considers issues like the care work and care economy. Now, let me conclude with a presentation with our call to action. We know that more needs to be done to make Social Security a right enjoyed by everyone. And our failure to deliver creates even greater inequalities. This comes at a high price for our society. It contradicts our moral and our human rights values. So our hope is that this guide is a tool that can help change this imbalance and guarantee social protection to migrant and refugee workers and their families. I want to draw your attention to many other resources the ILO has published. Shara had mentioned some of those, the other useful tools. There are model interventions based on ILO and ISA's guide on extending social protection to migrant workers, refugees, and their families. That was developed in collaboration with ISA and ITC ILO. And of course, we have an ITC ILO course. So for those of you interested to take a deeper dive, we really invite you to join the annual e-learning course on extending social protection to migrant workers and refugees. And you can even register now for the fall session. I'd like to end this presentation by thanking all of the colleagues in ISA and the ILO who were instrumental to this guide, and send out a particularly special acknowledgement to Sami Kazi Ayul and Clara Van Panhuis for their coordination and their strong dedication to making sure this guide became a reality. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for walking us through the guide and actually showing its very practical nature and action orientation. I'm now pleased to pass the baton to Raul Ruja Frick, who is the director of the Social Security Development Branch of ISA, for him to moderate the second half of this webinar. Thank you, everybody. Raúl, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Manuela. Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Thank you very much, Manuela. Good afternoon, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you in this webinar where we present such fundamental guides as the speakers said. We will be brief with this roundtable, which will shed light about practices that are being implemented in some countries. These countries are very important, and we are going to start by Mrs. Cristina Lobo Ferreira, who comes from the Social Security Association of Portugal. Then we have Mr. Eduardo Lepore, who's National Director for Social Security Regimes Coordination, Social Security Secretariat of Argentina, and Tai Bohuche, Mr. Tai Bohuche, who's Director of the Social Protection of the Workers Ministry of Health and Social Protection in Morocco. So let's start with this roundtable. And we are going to ask Cristina about the different measures in Portugal. So Cristina, what measures were taken in Portugal in the pandemic of COVID-19 regarding the migrant workers who were residing in the Portugal Sea?
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for this invitation to be here. I would like to say that as part of the social security in Portugal, we have a system of social protection. Of course, some of these protections are subject to the residency status of the worker, However, because of COVID-19, we had to extend all the protections to the migrant workers and their family as a result. So we have taken some actions in this area, and I will describe them chronologically. So in 15th of March, when it was closed, the borders, we created associations with, we created opportunity for all workers via associations independent of being residents in Portugal or just being migrant workers. The extension of these benefits were followed by the impact of the limitation of crossing borders at that point as a result of COVID-19. So this happened just after, and we maintained the rights of these workers to guarantee that they could cross the border to work, like in Spain, for example. After that, we carried out a special work between Portugal and Spain to guarantee the rights of these workers that were working across borders. So this work was developed by both countries, Portugal and Spain. When we started having the lockdowns, the people that had to be maintained in lockdown, we reduced face-to-face interactions or presential interactions. And of course, for those workers, we gave special attention. But of course, for some services that were used by the migrants, they had to do some work that it was face-to-face. And we provided the due rights for those workers as well. In relation to the permanence in the country, so for those workers that had the visa expired during the lockdowns of COVID-19, during the limitations of crossing across borders, the rights of these workers were maintained and the visa was extended. In May 2020, we decided that these people would have access to any rights independent of the visa expiration or not. We've also considered all those workers that had pending resolutions in relation to the visa. So those workers, we just decided that they would be considered legally able to work in the country. We had issues that we had to sort out. We also had to deal with the workers that were living in Portugal and in other EU countries, because this law in Portugal was a law that came from the EU. So those workers that could not be contacted, they had the social protection that it was available to them before the pandemic. So this measure that it was taken at EU level will expire in June 2022. And the workers, Portuguese workers or foreign workers, if they had to work in Portugal and if they were absent for 3 months without losing their rights, this was suspended. This was suspended during during COVID-19 limitations in terms of traveling and all that sort of actions that impacted the possibility of mobility. In Portugal, during the pandemic, we also simplified the access of these workers, and we facilitated the reduction of documents that that the workers could provide as an evidence of insertion in the workplace. This was applied, for example, for the agricultural workers, and this affected a lot of people in Portugal. So at some point, those seasonal workers that were working here, they had to declare daily that they were doing the work. The company had to declare about them, and those sorts of measures were suspended to facilitate things and to facilitate the lives of the migrant workers.
Thank you very much. We see that in a country can implement measures and can accompany the implementation of policies, let's say, thanks to the simplification of the processes or the access of information by workers, those workers who are under a special situation. So thank you very much, Cristina, for all these measures, because they are a very clear example of good work and practical work and under hard conditions as the COVID-19 pandemic was. So now let's travel to Argentina, and we are going to ask our colleague Eduardo from the Ministry of Labor, Employment and Social Security the following. So Eduardo, you have in your country many multilateral and bilateral agreements. You have a vast history of implementation of all these collective agreements. So could you tell us what the steps to sign a bilateral or a multilateral agreement is? Yeah, thank you very much, Raul. First of all, let me say that it's a pleasure to be here with you and to participate in this meeting. Thank you very much to the ISA and the ILO for the organization of this meeting. I can see that we are talking about the outcome of the previous meetings we have been holding. In the last meetings, we wanted to foster multilateral and bilateral agreements to adequate the social protection of migrant workers. I think that the cooperation between the ISA and the ILO is crucial. Congratulations. Regarding the questions, of course, Argentina has a vast history in these matters, especially due to the migration background that it has. We have hosted many migrants, and so today, we have 14 agreements, among others, bilateral and multilateral agreements for the region. And we are in the way to ratifying 3 collective agreements. And besides, we are negotiating others. And for us, this is very important. As I was mentioning earlier, this activity and this all these agreements are funded in the reality as well as the equality of treatment of migrant workers so that they can gain access to social protection rights and to work as it is enshrined in our constitution as well as our law on migration. The law of migration is an example for the protection of the rights of migrant workers. And to describe our history, we started to sign these agreements back in the 70s, according to the migratory and cultural bonds we have with Italy and Spain. And from that moment onwards, we developed other agreements with other European countries and Latin American countries. Over 80% of migrant workers in Argentina come from South America, and therefore we had made big efforts to include them through multilateral agreements, for example, the Mercosur agreement, and this gives us a big spectrum of action, but we are extending all these agreements. Recently, we wanted to sign agreements with Canada. We have other agreements that are going to be ratified, such as the one with Israel. And this last bundle of agreements shows our interest in Argentina to contact with all these countries. We are negotiating as well with India in order to strengthen our bonds with Asian countries. And we think that this orientation is linked with the development of economic and international relations. So this work is carried out together with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The agreements are the first step to establish later on multilateral and bilateral social security agreements, and to carry out economic changes. So this is a very important dimension for us. Thank you very much, Eduardo, to share the latest developments in Argentina. We know what happened in the region, and thank you for sharing all these agreements, among others, the Mercosur agreement that gathers Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, which came into force in 2008, and with which different actions started. Yeah, it's a pleasure to hear how these Argentinian policies are being extended towards emerging countries. And this is a good example of a positive example of the globalization and the formalization of the status of migrant workers. So now we go to other continent.
And now I'm going to invite Taib Bouhouch, Director of Workers' Social Protection, Director of the Ministry of Labor and Vocational Integration of Morocco, to take the floor. He was involved in ISA and now he's working in Morocco. So now my question to you is that Morocco has extended social protection to migrant workers. Could you tell us about developments in your country? Thank you very much. I am quite honored to be here today. Once more, since I work closely with you, Raúl, and with ISA. As you said, Raúl, Morocco is one of the most active countries in social protection.
For example, the first bilateral and multilateral agreements were signed in the 1960s. Because due to its position, Morocco is very close to Europe. It also hosts many migrants. And this is why these are two trends that we see in Morocco: migration of Moroccan people in Morocco going to Europe. But also, Morocco is a host country for many migrants. And this is why, for a very long time in our country, we have seen migration flows from Morocco and into Morocco. And this is why Morocco has always had migration policies. It has always participated in agreements in order to protect migrant workers as well as their families. And it also signed in December 1990 an agreement, a UN agreement. I'm sorry, Taib, but we no longer see you. Great, it's back. So as I said, Morocco has always ratified international agreements in order to protect migrant workers, but it also signed many agreements and many agreements are related to migration flows. There are over 19 agreements that Morocco signed in various countries. The first ones were mostly with European countries and long-standing traditions, notably France in 1963. Sorry, 1965 for the agreement for with France. We also had an agreement with the Netherlands in 1972 and Spain. These are mere examples. So the principle is to maintain continuity and guarantee social protection of migrant workers. The aim is also to protect workers when they are mobile and when they decide to settle in another country. Obviously, all agreements apply with the principles of equality, continuity, mobility, human rights. And this is for Moroccan workers leaving to foreign countries. But this is also true for foreign workers settling down in Morocco. In 1972, there was a law on social security, and it takes due account of the social protection of migrant workers. Therefore, there is no distinction between nationals and foreign workers. To the contrary, both are on an equal footing thanks to this law. And it is the social security of Morocco that tackles with this. So Morocco is a host country due to its geographical position, its stability and economy, and therefore Morocco attracts foreign workers.
This is why there is a legal framework allowing migrant workers to benefit from social protection on an equal footing with Moroccan workers. And this is also true for Moroccan migrants leaving the country. So many agreements were signed in order to guarantee the rights of workers. Obviously, some countries do not have such a framework in order to protect migrant workers. And in this case, a bill was proposed in Morocco in order to allow migrant workers coming back to Morocco to benefit from social protection. So this is what I can say. Thank you very much, Tahib. This is very interesting indeed. You are showing that there were bilateral measures and agreements with European partners as well as emerging countries. And my dear participants, you will find all this guidance while contacting us. So if you have any questions, you will be able to find it by contacting us. I'm going to change to Spanish.
So now we're going to have another round of questions. So the first question was about the measures that we had to put in place, that are in place. And it's really interesting to see these three perspectives from different countries. And now we're going to see the challenges, because obviously we still have a lot of work to do, and that's important to know. And as our speakers mentioned, but and now we're going to take a look at the challenges, and we're going to start with Cristina. And we would like to see that also, because Portugal has a lot of agreements, bilateral and multilateral agreements. So we would like to see also like what are the main challenges or obstacles to ensure a good management of these multilateral agreements, taking into account, for example, the fact that Portugal is in two of the main multilateral agreements. So, because if you know, for example, the agreements of Ibero-America and the agreements of the European Union are two of the more important ones at international level, and Portugal and Spain are in both of them. So we will actually know the opinion of Cristina on this topic. We would like to see Portugal's opinion. Cristina, the floor is yours.
Mute, Cristina.
Gracias. Fazemos com muito trabalho e com muito. We do a lot of work and we have a lot of effort. But first of all, allow me to tell you, as I said before, we have a law and a principle in Portugal of equality, and this is our more important law in terms of social protection. And this allows us, in the beginning, the principle of acquired rights. For example, everyone has to pay tax, and they also guarantee through the celebration of those instruments the protection of the workers' right. The famous and well-known expression that you have to contribute to receive. We have 20 bilateral agreements with Canada and also with Quebec, Ontario, and Canada. And in the coordination of social security, we have 31 coordinations, European places, 31 European countries, not only the European countries, but also Switzerland, and guarantees from the UK that unfortunately is not part of the European Union no longer, but it's also still part of Europe. And the link is very strong with the United Kingdom and Portugal. And we're also very proud to say that we have a convention, a multi-country agreement. And also we have a convention that is already signed, but is not yet implemented with countries of CPLC, countries, the Portuguese-speaking countries. And this is a tool that we really would like to see all countries, and I think I'm talking about all the states that signed. We would like to see everyone, we would like to see this convention ready. But these are the main agreements that we have. And also the international tools that we are part of. In 2020, outside the European Union, 10.25 of the assets were, this is a number that is growing a lot from 1917, 1919, is increased for 5.10%, and we calculate that is going to continue grow, especially with other agreements that have been signed. We agree, we think that this is going to continue to grow the number of foreign workers that are part of the social service. So the questions that there is a need for us to negotiate good agreements, good administrative agreements that can guarantee there are organizations that work together that can do this constant treatment and to try to assess the problems and to start going forward. They have this mission, and I think this is the best way for us to make sure that those agreements are signed and put in place. We have 3 subcommittees, one for legal, and also another one in terms of data, and the Administrative Commission of Europe regularly developed a very important program about all the questions that are raised, and they take decisions
sobre questões que se levantaram e que importa referir.
With all the member states, questions that are raised, and this is a very intelligent way to try to solve all the difficulties that we can see in those rules, because sometimes some problems might occur due to the activity of the people, and people can change their situations. Normally, those conventions, any of those conventions applied, there are some specific questions that, for instance, in the European level, there is a group
é muito relevante,
is talking about telework. Clearly, this is very relevant, is a new reality, and for me, created a completely different level. I think the fact that we are here today is already a proof that the telework is something that can be done with good quality, with the possibility that a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, was impossible to think that we were able to do this. And above all, for last but not the least, the exchange of information, it's for us, And I think this is for everyone. This worry, we are dealing with the digitalization now. We have to guarantee the exchange of information, because that's the only way that we can give the people the access that the conventions are guaranteeing. And the delay of this information normally is a question of, is the problem, is the reason why we have so many problems. That's why at this point, the situation in the agreements, it's very important. We know that this is a challenge, especially in relation to the protection of the workers. We have to talk a lot about this, and the level of the European Union in terms of protection of data is very high, and it's not applied all over the world, but Portugal is also under the European law, so we have to follow their agreements. But we have different mechanisms as well. For the ones who know, it's the case for different committees. We're trying to develop an information system that allows exchange of information. And we have this in a Ibero-American Convention, and the European level, we have another example, the European system of exchange of information. So this way, we can guarantee a more efficient exchange of information to shorten the time, and this is very, very important and is very recognized in all institutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Cristina,
for all this information. First of all, I would like to say best of luck. I hope that the covenant of the Portuguese-speaking countries sees the light. We are supporting the cause in the ISA, and Mariano is also supporting the cause. We are in contact with our colleagues and dearest participants, I think that operational aspects are fundamental, and Cristina shared, first of all, what the experience in Portugal is, and in the chapter 3 you can read some questions regarding the organization of the agreements, and especially related to the data exchange. So in the chapter 3, you have these basic aspects. You can also find some technical materials. And as I was mentioning earlier, and as the Secretary General of the ISA was mentioning, we are reaching out to other institutions. We are working together with other institutions, and the data exchange shouldn't be any hinder for our processes. And now we go to Argentina, and we are going to touch upon the exchange of data, but within the country. And why? Because we have some obstacles at the international level, but especially in the countries with a decentralized structure and with different institutions, the data exchange can also represent a challenge. So Eduardo, since in Argentina there are different pension schemes, what are the challenges to be able to share data within the country? You have the floor. Well, thank you very much, Raul. This is a paramount topic. To give a broader picture, in my previous contribution and in the previous contribution, the informal status of migrant workers was highlighted, and the need to include all these aspects in the collective agreements. So these are tools that we are going to use because this is very important for us in the regional, in the region, and especially because the migrant workers are those subject to a higher level of informality. And on top of it, the fragmentation of the system is a very important element. And as you were asking with your questions, in those decentralized countries, we have a bigger challenge because we have a variety of institutions, of social security bodies, which are autonomous. So it makes things more complex, and coordination becomes a very big challenge. So in Argentina, in the Ministry of Labor, we created a list of bodies, and this is the first step. On this list, we include all the social security bodies, regardless if they are regional, local, or if they are complementary. They have to be registered because it is a way to give the social security system more transparency. For a social security system to be transparent, we need this kind of instruments. And now we are making efforts to implement systems for the electronic exchange of data. So as I was explaining earlier, we have experience in multilateral and regional agreements, for example, the Mercosur agreement. And these agreements give us the possibility to exchange data virtually. So the data exchange is guaranteed. And of course, there are always things to do and improvements to make when it comes to these kind of technologies. But the first challenge is to create this list with all actors involved in the process of the social security system. And this allows us to be more coordinated because, as I was saying earlier, in federated states, we have to harmonize. But first of all, we have to coordinate all instruments. So since we have a good experience in regional agreements, this is the second biggest challenge for us. And as it happens with everything, we have a process which has its ups and downs, its drawbacks and its advantages, but we want this system to be more convergent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Eduardo. And clearly, the challenges and difficulties shouldn't be an obstacle for the inclusion of migrant workers. And I think that Portugal's and Argentina's experience shows us how important it is to exchange information at the international level, as well as to coordinate all efforts at the national level. Although it creates problems, it doesn't block the implementation of instruments. And thanks to these two examples, we see that migrant workers are granted social protection. Now we go to Morocco.
Morocco has been very active in terms of governance with different countries and digitalization of services in different fields of social security. I think that Taib is very savvy because he is was a computing director at the Morocco Caisse Nationale de Sécurité. But I think that these two aspects are very important because this is part of a country's capacity to go ahead along the line of what Cristina and Eduardo have said. So Taib, in Morocco, what are the main challenges in terms of extension of social protection and coordination with other countries? Taib, you have the floor and the mic is muted. The mic is muted. Yes, sorry. Thank you, Raul, for this important question. Maybe a parenthesis before answering, because there is a question that I have received in writing. How is it possible to have equity and social protection for Moroccans in Morocco and working abroad? That is not what I said. Just to correct that, I was talking about equity, equality of treatment for workers working in Morocco, be they Moroccan or foreigners. So equality is ensured with by a law signed in 1972. There is no difference between Moroccan workers and foreign workers. Moroccan workers working abroad have social protection in the country they are in, and the bilateral covenants between these countries and Morocco ensures three principles. First, the continuity of the rights. When the person working in another country, has to go to another country on a temporary basis, then the continuity of the rights when they settle in another country, and also answers to a series of questions. It was related to a question I received in writing. With regards to challenges, you know, Raul, this is one of the reasons why I talked about I now work in this field and no longer in computing and technology, because today we need social protection professions, and they have to be thought thinking into consideration what technologies can offer, and not on the and not the opposite, because we think of professions processes. Just as an example, I think you all know about that, but this is a good example. Let's take what people have to pay for social protection, the part that they have to pay, despite the generalization of compulsory health protection. Well, in some cases, when you have to pay in advance for social health, for healthcare, and then being reimbursed, well, it can lead to some difficulties for people who are not able to pay in advance. So if we do not think of this process, the money that people have to pay in advance, if we have no information in order to make sure that technology serves this process, and we have to think that we are all stakeholders of social protection. Well, things can change, and that is the reason why. Well, I think of the fourth digital revolution that we are living today. It's not about digitalizing the process that was thought some time ago, but we have to rethink them and review our processes using the technologies that we have. Shared platforms could be solutions at the national level or at the international level, because today, instead of exchanging information, that is actually a difficulty, a problem that still has to be solved in terms of interconnections between social security and the community of law of workers. So instead of thinking of exchanging data in a bilateral way with a common denominator, I think we need to start a reflection upon shared platforms at the global level. I think that Raul is going to agree with me, but actually today we have some experiences to have information exchange tools, but we could have something at the global level, and we could start a reflection upon these platforms in order to share a minimum level of information that is exchanged between two countries. And that is one of the main challenges that social security faces and the continuity of rights for migrant workers, because if we do not have that, if we do not have a good, seamless information exchange, well, we need to have that, because without that, it is impossible to ensure a continuity of rights. And it will be impossible to have a fluid continuity of these rights, because mobility today, as you can see, well, everybody can work in a country and tomorrow work in another country. And information exchange is a problem. So maybe we have to think upon a common basis, principle of social protection at a global level, because, well, today we depend on covenants. That is good, it's working, actually. And we had bilateral contacts between countries. And we had covenants for social protection, but maybe taking into consideration these covenants, we could think of something at the international level, using information exchange platforms to be able to exchange data. So that is regarding the first question. So in Morocco, we have a concrete reflection on data exchange. And I can tell you that today administration is connected. Moroccan administration is connected. We passed a law recently, and all administrations can exchange data. And in some cases, administrations have the obligation to ask information to a person if the information can be exchanged between administrations. It is a very strong piece of legislation, because how can I put it? Moroccan policymakers believe that with technology today, we will be able to improve all aspects, all administrative and legislative aspects, for instance, social protection aspects. So that is the experience that we have in Morocco in terms of interconnectivity, to make sure that we have a continuity of rights, that we have a mobility and information exchange between administrations. I think that this is a huge opportunity to have a global reflection in ISA or in other organizations to think of that possibility. So to have bilateral contacts, obviously, but also to have a minimum common basis and to have platforms. And all countries should have access to these platforms with a minimum level of information to ensure mobility. That is for the first challenges of information exchange. You also have to know that amongst the limitations that we have in Morocco, well, one of these limitations is to make sure that foreigners know their rights. That is a problem, because independently of the legal framework that you have, if a foreigner, a migrant working in Morocco is not made aware of the rights, it will be impossible for that people to claim these rights. So we need some kind of training of, information campaign to help people and to help migrants to benefit from their rights. We also have non-salaried workers. Today, when we talk about these dimensions, we talk about paid workers. What about workers with no salaries? Because if we take into consideration the economic model that we have, many people are freelancing and they develop services in terms of being an employee. So I think that we have to integrate that, that component just to be able to think of a model for freelancers and employees. That is it for me. And well, good luck with the next steps. Thank you. Thank you very much, Taib. Thank you very much for that. I think that the last thing you said is important. We have to keep on working and to be able to ensure a cover for workers, because we have some weaknesses also at the national level, but at the international level, well, I think that it goes along the line of that.
A bit over time, but I would like to thank all the speakers and for the different points. It has been really very, very complementary in terms of different point of view and experiences. If I have to summarize, it will be difficult because there were many, many points, but I think that one of the main messages is that the protection of migrant workers is not an option, it's a must. And it's also strongly related with the formalization of the workers worldwide. So formalization and the protection of migrant workers, and they come together and are part also of our work and in the ISA and the ILO. And I think that what we heard in this really great and the webinar is that although all the difficulties, it's possible to protect migrant workers in different conditions, in different situations. And we heard and very interesting experiences that you had the persons in charge of that, protecting migrant workers in different circumstances, and show everyone that it's possible to develop the instruments that you can read in the guide. So you can go through the guide that we work with the colleagues of ILO to provide the different orientations to cover the migrant workers in different aspects. So my other point will be, and in terms of implementation, in terms of putting into practice the policies to protect migrant workers, go to the guide. The guide also are going to lead you to other resources and other activities. I would like also to say that the ILO, in the government body of the ILO, is going to discuss these matters the next 19th of March. And the subject matter will be around a paper prepared by the ILO colleagues around the securing social protection for migrant workers and their families, challenges and options for building a better future. And this will be a key topic that the ILO government body is going to discuss on the 19th of March. Also, and together with the ILO colleagues, we are developing a number of activities to support institutions and to support all the organizations around the protection of migrant workers to develop their capacities to address the difficulties around the guide. So there will be training activities to support the application of the guide. And also you can go to the different application scenarios concerning the protection of different categories of migrant workers. So now I would like to, of course, to remind you to go to the website of the ILO, to the website of the ISA, and to find the latest reports and the latest resources, and to follow our communication for the upcoming activities. I would like to thank everyone, and 1 minute before we're finishing, 15 minutes late, but thank you very much again to all the participants. Thank you to the interpreters for this for this work, and we are looking forward meeting you again to discuss other activities for the protection of migrant workers. Thank you very much.